And it wouldn't have mattered whether they did or not. But it occurred to me that the whole group, the whole family is involved in this religion. Last Wednesday, I was sitting in the office doing some work here, and the door opens and this fellow comes in, and he's about my age, and comes in and he says, "I'm Pastor such and such. Now, I'm looking for the pastor." And so I heard that, my antennas went up, and so I came out and I introduced myself and I said, "Come on in." He came in and sat down, and he looked pretty upset, and so he sat down and he says, I'm a pastor of the Church of God, and that's how he talked, just like that. And so I'm thinking, this is, I'm like ready, I have no idea why this person's here or why they showed up. And he says, "I came by and I saw Unity Church of Christianity, and I thought, I need some help." And then he went on to tell me about some things that he was dealing with in his life that were pretty profound and pretty personal, and that was a struggle. And he was, and the more he talked, the more it was clear that he really, needed some help and support. And so I listened. And theologically, he's over there and we're over here, right? I mean, we're in entirely different worlds. And his languaging and stuff is somewhat unfamiliar to me, although I've had some experience. But I could feel what it is that was going on and what he needed. And we talked, and about the only thing I said was that I wish you didn't have to beat yourself up so much. That's about the only thing that I really said. And then I said, well, this is a God thing. So let's just pray about it. And so we sat and we prayed. And I gave him an affirmation. I'm in the flow of I don't know, but God does, which is my favorite affirmation. And I didn't call it an affirmation, but okay. I called it a prayer. Okay. And he grabbed it, and he got up and he felt better and he walked out the door. And we had an experience. We had a moment. We had a connection. We had something that was beyond the physical structure and circumstances of our belief systems. We had an experience with God together, which is so affirmative for me. It's to know that that can happen, that it isn't about the theological construction of what it is that we are. Theology is so weird, because we create this whole dogma, and I just have this sense that dogma is created as a result of someone's experience. Someone has an experience, and they decide that because they had that experience, they think everybody else should have that experience because that's the way, right? And so they create this structure so that they believe everybody needs to do in order to have that experience that they had, and then that becomes the structure, which becomes the religion, which becomes the effort to bring an experience, which has a great fundamental premise that is good, but often a result that is something other than that, perhaps. Because instead of becoming about an experience, it becomes about control. So it shifts from experience to control. And we're not in this for control. We're in this to have the spiritual experience. And I personally believe, that there is no experience that can be transferred. You can't share my experience. You can share the consciousness out of which that experience creates, but you can't share the experience because you have your experience. Every one of us has a different path to God. Every one of us is awakened and has a different result of that awakening, and we cannot transfer that onto anyone else. We can create environments where people have openings, but it's still their experience. It's very personal, it's very intimate, it's very powerful, and when we acknowledge it in that context and realize that that's what it's about, it becomes a whole different reality for us. I missed something here. When I was in ministerial school, we were on a class trip to Florida. And we were visiting all the churches, and two of my classmates, Vasco Oji, who was a Nigerian chief, and he'd come over from Nigeria, because there are like 52 Unity churches in Nigeria. It's a big area for Unity, because in the 20s, Charles Fillmore used to get up in the middle of the night. He had a radio broadcast. Unity was the first religion on radio in the 20s. He bought a radio thing. So he'd get up in the middle of the night, and he'd sit in his underwear, and he'd broadcast Unity, right? Well, it would bounce, you know, the bounce, and they picked it up in Nigeria. And as a result of that, 52 Unity churches exist in Nigeria because of this bounce, which is a whole other story. Anyway, Vasco was part of my ministerial class. He's about at that time, 55-year-old Nigerian chief. He was kind of the master, the wisdom, the sage of his, you know, he came over, he's this little guy about this big, and he has this kind of this deep voice. And he and Gervais Phillips, who was a former Southern Baptist minister, which is also part of my class, were having lunch together. And two very unlikely people to have lunch together, but Gervais is this really friendly guy, and so he and Vasco were sitting, and then they went in and they sat down in this restaurant, and they ordered the same thing. They both ordered a salad, and so the waitress brought the salad. And so Gervais is eating his salad, and he says to Vasco, he says, Vasco, he said, this salad is not very good. And Vasco looks at him and said, it is not good. And Gervais immediately, with that support, calls the waitress over and says, come on over. So the waitress comes over and says, this salad isn't very good. Isn't that right, Vasco? And Vasco looks at him, and he looks at the waitress, and he says, it is good. And so, that kind of took all of the wind out of Gervais. So the waitress leaves. So they get up, and after they're done, they pay the bill, and they're walking out. And Gervais turns to Vasco, and he says, Vasco, he said, I asked you about the salad, and you said it was not good. And then I called the waitress over, and you said it was good. So was it good, or was it not good? And Vasco, in his great wisdom, turns to Gervais, and he said, it is good, but not for me. Okay? And I think that is what it's about. Okay? It is good. Okay? It is all good. Okay? We may not feel good sometimes, but it is all good, this whole process that we are in. And all these Herods that we have around us, it's all good. It's all part of the journey. It's all part of what it is that we are about and what it is that we're trying to do.